Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. We are live here in Israel, bringing you the biggest headlines from the region and here. I'm Shosh Bajorzian, and today is day 706 of the war in Gaza. Let's get into all the top headlines at this hour. In the aftermath of the Israeli strike on Hamas's leadership in Doha, Qatar, Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Qatari Prime Minister are exchanging threats. Netanyahu warned, bring Hamas to justice or we will, Qatar says. Their response will come. Netanyahu is taking a defiant tone amid international criticism over Israel's strike against Hamas's leaders in Doha, telling Qatar, expel Hamas leaders or bring them to justice. If you don't, we will. Netanyahu compared Israel's strike to U.S. operations after the September 11th, 2001 terror attacks, the anniversary of which is today, 24 years. Israel followed the U.S. approach, said Netanyahu, accusing Qatar of harboring terrorists, financing Hamas, and giving its leaders mansions like the Taliban did for al-Qaeda. Netanyahu argued that the same countries that applauded the U.S. for killing Osama bin Laden should be ashamed of themselves for condemning Israel. Take a listen to what Netanyahu had to say.
What did America do in the wake of September 11th? It promised to hunt down the terrorists who committed this heinous crime wherever they may be. And it also passed a resolution in the Security Council of the UN 2 weeks later that said governments cannot give harbor to terrorists. Well, yesterday, we acted along those lines. We went after the terrorist masterminds who committed the October 7th massacre. And we did so in Qatar, which gives safe haven. It harbors terrorists. It finances Hamas. It gives its terrorist chieftains sumptuous villas. It gives them everything. So we did exactly what America did when it went after the terrorists, the al-Qaeda terrorists in Afghanistan, and after they went and killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. Now the various countries of the world condemn Israel. They should be ashamed of themselves. What did they do after America took out Osama bin Laden? Did they say, oh, what a terrible thing was done to Afghanistan or to Pakistan? No, they applauded. They should applaud Israel for standing and up to these same principles and carrying them out. And I say to Qatar and all nations who harbor terrorists, you either expel them or you bring them to justice. Because if you don't, we will.
And Qatar says it's reassessing its mediation role and Hamas's future in the country, and also warns that a regional response to Israeli strikes is coming. The Qatari Prime Minister told CNN that the response is under discussion with regional partners to Israel's attack on Qatari soil. He says Qatar is reassessing, quote, everything about its role as a mediator between Israel and Hamas for a Gaza ceasefire, as well as the Palestinian terror group's future in Qatar. The Prime Minister accuses Netanyahu of dragging the Middle East to, quote, chaos and of, quote, wasting Qatar's time, indicating he believes Israel hasn't been genuinely negotiating. He says Qatari officials were hurt in Israel's strike and are in critical condition, cautioning that the Gulf region is at risk. Doha received support from Gulf leaders. The president of the UAE made a surprise visit, with a UAE official saying the visit by the president was a show of regional solidarity with Qatar following the Israeli strikes. And the Saudi Arabia Crown Prince made a clear statement condemning also what he called Israeli aggression. Now, the IDF continues to take down high-rise buildings in the outskirts of Gaza City ahead of expected IDF operations to continue this takeover within the coming days and weeks. The army is also near completion of 2 new aid distribution sites in southern Gaza. And while demanding that Gazan civilians leave Gaza City for humanitarian zones, Israel is rushing to prepare 2 new aid sites that we said they're under construction near Rafah at this moment. The sites will be run by the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. These sites are designed to be safer and more accessible than earlier GHF locations. They'll include unloading areas and distribution zones so that when one zone runs out of food, people can be rerouted to another that's being restocked. Efforts are also being made to make the walk from coastal humanitarian areas and evacuation zones to these new sites as short as possible. And let's get to our guest right now. Joining us to discuss all of this is the Director of Research at Israel Defense and Security Forum, Brigadier General Yossi Cooper-Wasser. Thanks so much for being with us, as always.
Thank you for having me. And by the way, I'm now the head of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, but let's go on.
Okay, well, I'm glad we got that right. Thank you for correcting me. I want to first discuss Doha, Qatar, and these strikes that took place there. Talk to me about the response that we're seeing from countries, for example, condemning these strikes despite Hamas living these luxurious lives in Doha. What's your take on this?
Well, I think many countries believe that Israel crossed the red line and attacked target that is located in a country that is not an enemy and not even of Israel, and definitely others don't want to look at Qatar as an enemy in spite of its support of terrorism. And because Qatar, as we all know, is a complicated issue. And I think that they want to show solidarity with Qatar, and even the Americans are in a problematic position because Qatar hosts the big American base at Tel Aviv. So it's a complicated issue. But I think Israel also, at the same time, managed to deliver and convey a very clear message. We are determined to charge those who carried out the attack of 7th of October with a heavy price. And even if they are in Qatar, this doesn't give them immunity, and we shall reach them wherever they are. And if Qatar thought that it is a safe place for the leadership of Hamas, because it is involved in some effort to negotiate and bring about an agreement that would release the hostages, yes, this was true as long as they were doing that. But the feeling in Israel was that the Qataris are not doing the utmost in order to make it happen. And the feeling was that the Hamas was going to refuse to even the last offer by President Trump. And there's no point in keeping treating Qatar as a mediator. It's more on the side of Hamas by hosting it, and rather than real mediator.
Now, I want to ask you about Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments, specifically, basically calling out Qatar for harboring these terrorists, having them and allowing them to live inside of Doha, Qatar. But the Prime Minister was very clear with his remarks, and he spoke about September 11th and the magnitude, what it means to Americans. Today is the 24th anniversary of September 11th. Can you talk about the comparison the Prime Minister made here between September 11th and October 7th, and how the Americans went after Osama bin Laden despite it taking years to do so, and what the comparison is here?
Well, there are 2 points in this comparison. First, the Qataris gave aid to some of the terrorists who were involved in the 9/11 attack, especially Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, which they notified him that the Americans are going to arrest him and allowing him to run away. So this is one connection of the Qataris to the 9/11 story. And the other is the comparison that the United States carried out the attack against Osama bin Laden in Pakistani territory. And even though Pakistan is a friend of the United States, and definitely Qatar is not a friend of Israel. Qatar is working against Israel in many ways, especially through its media capabilities, especially Al Jazeera and others. So it's just the same that when you need to reach the heads of the terror groups, you do things that you generally try to refrain from doing.
And I want to move over and talk about the situation in Gaza. We know the IDF is continuing operations. Like we mentioned before, they are continuing to target these high-rise buildings where they say Hamas infrastructure is located inside. But also these evacuations are continuing. How do you foresee this timeline at this point in time? Do you expect a full Gaza City takeover to be within the next few weeks or days?
Look, what Israel is trying to do right now is prepare the battlefield on the one hand and try to convince Hamas that we are really serious about entering Gaza and taking it over, Gaza City, I mean. And I think in a way what we did in Qatar is also a tool in delivering the same message, because, look, if we are ready to carry out an attack that is crossing the red lines known until now, then you can imagine that we are not going to be shy about entering Gaza City.
And Israel continues to, thwart attacks from all surrounding areas of this country. Just yesterday, Israel, the IDF, struck military targets in Yemen that the Houthis use, specifically the public relations headquarters in the capital of Yemen in Sana'a yesterday. Can you talk about these attacks that keep going on between the Houthis and Israel? We know that these ballistic missile attacks and drone attacks continue to happen against Israel, and Israel responds by targeting more infrastructure. How much more infrastructure do the Houthis actually have in Yemen?
Well, they still have some infrastructure, and the point is that they lose more and more of their infrastructure. The greater the chance is that they are going to listen to reason, and because their reason is different than ours. But even they have a cost-effectiveness equation to look at. So I think that even they, when the price becomes too heavy, will at one point try to reassess. We are probably not there yet, because we have already eliminated some of their ministers, including the prime minister, and this has not worked out well in convincing them to stop. But we have to look at the wider picture. What Israel is trying to do is achieve two goals simultaneously. One is to destroy as much as possible the Iranian-led axis and weaken it. And we did a marvelous job in Lebanon, and we brought about the collapse of Assad in Syria. And we are, after hitting hard the Iranian infrastructure, and especially the nuclear infrastructure. And yes, we still have to deal with the Houthis. I hope that this is going to be eventually taken care of. The other thing that we are focused on, is not less important, is to make sure that the 7th of October is remembered in the Palestinian memory as a huge mistake. It's a terrible mistake that was done by Hamas, and that they shall never even think about another 7th of October. That's why it's so important to finish the job in Gaza and make sure that Hamas is removed from power and all of the hostages are released. That's necessary for Israel to be able to enshrine in the history of the Middle East, and especially in the history of the Palestinians, and especially in the minds of the people of Hamas, that they made a terrible mistake by launching the 7th of October 7th of October attack, and they should never do that again.
Yossi, well, thank you so much for being with us. And to remind our viewers, there are 48 hostages that are still in Hamas captivity in Gaza at this point in time. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And moving over to this shocking story, horrific story we are continuing to cover. Conservative commentator, influencer, and staunch Israel advocate Charlie Kirk was shot and killed in front of a crowd of hundreds of people on Wednesday during a live Q&A session at a college campus event. The murder was all captured on video. It happened just as a student was actually asking Kirk a question about mass shootings in America. A single gunshot rang out, striking the 31-year-old directly in the neck. Blood poured from the wound as Kirk collapsed to the floor. His body was then limp. The shooter remains at large at this point in time, with no arrests made at this hour of the day. And it appears images coming out from the event actually show a person on an opposite rooftop from where Kirk was located. indicating that the location he may have been shot from. Now, other video shows the person on the rooftop running away. Now, the brutal killing has sent absolute shockwaves around the world, here in Israel and in government officials talking about it. And civilians alike are mourning the death of a prominent evangelical Christian husband and father of two, a man who spent years pushing back against anti-Semitism and anti-Israel rhetoric, especially on U.S. college campuses. He's the founder of Turning Point USA. Kirk was known for his willingness to engage in political dialogue across all lines with anyone who wanted to have a conversation with him. He often traveled to Israel, was a supporter of President Donald Trump and his move for the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Take a listen to some of Charlie Kirk's interactions. We're actually going to go ahead and play the soundbite that Donald Trump said about Charlie Kirk.
To my great fellow Americans, I am filled with grief and anger at the heinous assassination of Charlie Kirk on a college campus in Utah. Charlie inspired millions, and tonight all who knew him and loved him are united in shock and horror. Charlie was a patriot who devoted his life to the cause of open debate and the country that he loved so much, the United States of America. He fought for liberty, democracy, justice, and the American people. He's a martyr for truth and freedom, and there has never been anyone who was so respected by youth. Charlie was also a man of deep, deep faith, and we take comfort in the knowledge that he is now at peace with God in heaven. Our prayers are with his wife, Erica, the two young, beloved children, and his entire family, who he loved more than anything in the world. We ask God to watch over them in this terrible hour of heartache and pain. This is a dark moment for America. Charlie Kirk traveled the nation, joyfully engaging with everyone interested in good faith debate. His mission was to bring young people into the political process, which he did better than anybody ever, to share his love of country and to spread the simple words of common sense. On campuses nationwide, he championed his ideas with courage, logic, humor, and grace. It's a long past time for all Americans and the media to confront the fact that violence and murder are the tragic consequence of demonizing those with whom you disagree day after day, year after year, in the most hateful and despicable way possible.
And joining us now to discuss all of this is Tuli Wise, the director of Israel 365. Tuli, we're hearing that you have some connections to Charlie Kirk. Tell us what they are.
Is somebody who cares deeply about Israel, and over the last couple of months we've been working with some of his team to help get the truth about Israel out there in a more effective way to Gen Z.
And in terms of that, have you had any type of contact with Charlie Kirk or your team? And if so, what has that been like?
So my colleague Rabbi Pesach Walicki has been traveling to Turning Point USA, which is Charlie Kirk's annual big conference, thousands and thousands of young people that he has been putting Israel at the forefront of. And so we've been in touch, and our organizations are working together. And it's really just about helping him with what he is all about. Charlie Kirk has been for biblical values and against the red-green alliance, and he's been very concerned about the Islamic and the Marxist influence on Western civilization, and has been a major proponent of biblical values. And so it's a huge tragedy for America and as well for Israel. He's been such a vocal advocate for Israel and the Jewish people.
I mean, truly, that video was beyond graphic. All of us amongst this news team here are talking about it once we got into the office today. And it's an image that stays with you, because that angle of the video, and we won't play it for our viewers because it is beyond graphic. It's such a close-up shot of what had happened to Charlie Kirk yesterday. Could you talk about just the impact of people seeing this type of imagery of such a prominent person, as you mentioned, a person who has spoke pro-Israel and talking about the facts on the ground, specifically of this current war in Gaza?
Yeah, it's really, it's once you see it, you really can't unsee it, which is so terrifying. But to me, what really struck close to home was the tent that he was under said, "Prove me wrong." And he was there to debate. He encouraged debate, and he encouraged not a culture of silence, but a culture of honest dialogue. And he invited people whose opinions he disagreed with to argue with him, which is something that many in the Jewish community don't fully appreciate how important Charlie Kirk was to getting Israel's message out there. We are used to if you're pro-Israel, you have to be with Israel 100%. And Charlie was somebody who was always very open-minded. And if he saw a policy about Israel from the Israeli government that he did not agree with, so he would push back on that. But that didn't mean that he was an anti-Semite. Some in the Jewish left establishment accused him of being an anti-Semite unfairly, but if anything, he had a very important and good read of Gen Z. Gen Z are young kids who have this, culture of they're very against silencing, and so he included voices like Tucker Carlson at his conference, which again made some people feel that he was an anti-Semite. It's not true. It's not fair. And he just understood that the best way to fight darkness is with truth and by debate. And that's where, he was killed. He gave his life for freedom of speech, which is something that Israel really needs to learn if we want to really reach the next generation of American conservatives. We have to understand and learn from the legacy that Charlie left us.
So I think something very disturbing after all of this unfolded yesterday were the comments actually glorifying what had happened to Charlie Kirk. You mentioned the role social media plays with this younger generation. Can you talk about the impact of these comments that were made between, the aftermath of what had happened to Kirk?
Yeah, there's a lot of just, social media has become such a swamp, and it's dragging the culture into this descent of anarchy, of chaos, of anti-Semitism, of anti-Zionism. And he was the main bulwark against that descent. There have been terrible videos and clips of people celebrating. There's been a lot of Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians celebrating his death because Charlie was so pro-Israel. And then there have been on the right voices that have been accusing Israel of playing a role in his murder. So, the conspiracy theories are just so prevalent today. And he always fought through that nonsense with clarity, with conviction, with his Christian faith. And it's the new face. He really represented the new face of American Christian Zionists who are very different than the older generation that maybe we are used to seeing. But he really put together such an incredible movement of hundreds of thousands, really millions of young Americans who are deeply committed to conservative values and understand the role that Israel is playing in the world, fighting back against terror, fighting back against Islamic jihad. And that's something that he really appreciated and tried to communicate to his America First young Gen Z audience.
Julie, thanks so much for being with us today and speaking about this really horrific topic that unfortunately we're going to have to continue to follow because we do know that the suspect, is actually not in custody yet, and there is a manhunt that is underway at this point in time. We appreciate you taking the time to join us.
May his memory be a blessing.
Thank you. And Israeli officials are also expressing their deep condolences, with Prime Minister Netanyahu saying in a statement last night that Kirk was murdered for, quote, speaking truth and defending freedom. Netanyahu called him, quote, a lion-hearted friend of Israel. He fought the lies and stood tall for Judeo and Christian civilization. The Prime Minister said he actually spoke with Kirk 2 weeks ago and invited him to Israel. He expressed his sadness that this trip will no longer be taking place, saying, quote, his boundless pride in America and his valiant belief in free speech will leave a lasting impact. President Isaac Herzog in Israel also expressed his shock on X, saying, quote, Israel lost a true friend and a huge ally, while condemning the act of violence against Kirk. Take a listen to some of the exchanges Kirk had about Israel.
Kids, you mean they drop leaflets before they bomb in Gaza? They warn civilian corridors before they ever engage militarily. They do emergency medical procedures for any person in Gaza that might need it. Do you understand what's actually?
They're doing good, but it's okay for them to do bad. Then that's what
it's called war,
saying.
Okay? And in war, sometimes bad things happen.
But it's a
Who
war
started
crime.
this? It's not a war crime. Throwing around war crime is a ridiculous. You know what a war crime is? A war crime is going into
killing children is a
time
war
out.
crime.
Going into kibbutzes, going into the Nova Music Festival, going into people's places of residences on October 7th. I am here to clearly communicate to you that we have to do a much better job of communicating, of conveying, I should say, the geopolitical significance of the state of Israel.
And back over to the Houthis, as we spoke about earlier in the broadcast, after sustaining heavy damages from new Israeli airstrikes. Just yesterday, the Houthis fired yet another ballistic missile towards southern Israel early this morning. It was downed by air defense systems without causing any damages. And last night, Israel launched yet another devastating wave of airstrikes against the Houthi targets in Yemen, hitting military camps where operatives were located, a propaganda headquarters where their public relations was actually based, where their spokesperson was actually located, and a fuel depot. The precision strikes took out 15 key sites across a distance of more than 2,300 kilometers, one of the longest Israeli Air Force missions ever. Now, the attacks left around 35 people dead and more than 130 wounded, according to sources that spoke with local Arab media. The Houthi camps that were struck were used to, quote, plan and execute terror attacks, according to the IDF. They also contained operations and intelligence command centers that was used by the regime. That's what the military is saying. The latest strike came a day after the Houthis targeted Jerusalem on Tuesday night. A ballistic missile was shot and downed, intercepted by air defense systems at well. It also comes days after a strike caused damage to Ramon Airport in the south. And today's Houthi missile fire will certainly result in additional attacks from Israel, from what the patterns we have seen in the past few weeks. Now let's go to another story we are continuing to follow. We know that Israeli-Russian hostage Elizabeth Tsurkov is now back in Israel. She is apparently at Sheba Hospital, where she is receiving treatment there after her captivity in Iraq. The 38-year-old who was kidnapped in Iraq while researching for her PhD at Princeton University spent 2.5 years in Kataeb Hezbollah captivity, which is a pro-Iran terror group. Now, President Trump actually announced her return back home earlier this week. He brought a statement and put that on Truth Social, announcing this exciting thing for her family. They were overjoyed. What you're looking at on your screen is a video, the one video, proof of life video, the terror organization released of her while in captivity. President Trump said in that Truth Social message that she was safe at the American embassy in Iraq, in Baghdad specifically, and said that Elizabeth actually suffered months of torture. 2.5 years she spent in captivity. Now, Tsurkov was taken to Cyprus first after her release and landed Wednesday night in Israel. She will now undergo a similar protocol at Sheba Hospital, the similar protocol that the release hostages from Gaza actually undergo when they return home, from what we've seen in past hostage releases. Her family also thanks the Trump administration for fighting for Tsurkov's release, specifically mentioning Adam Bowler, who has been extremely helpful in getting her home, even though she's actually not an American citizen and her sister does hold a green card there. Now, we don't know the concessions yet for what really happened, but we do know, according to Iranian media right now. They're reporting that Tsurkov was released in exchange for 2 members of Iranian proxy groups. One of them is actually a senior Hezbollah member that was captured by the IDF. Of course, Israel has not confirmed this, neither has the United States. And we are also continuing to follow the top story that has shaken the United States, Israel, and globally, frankly, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We know a manhunt is still underway for that suspect, but stay with us for more live updates as we continue to follow all of this in real time. Thanks so much for joining, and see you soon.